In this lesson, we're gonna talk about something a bit more challenging actually, which is establishing the assessment scope. Now, when you're establishing the scope for the assessment, it is very important to make sure that you understand the importance of the organizational context and understand the environment you'll be working in. What is the culture of the organization? What are the executive's priorities? What regulatory compliance requirements are there? What are existing policies and processes that you should be assessing the practices against? All of that is important to understand as you move in doing the assessment. One of the positive side effects in doing the assessment is that it might clear some issues that were somewhat obscure. For instance, the development team might say there are no policies and standards that we should be working with. At the same time, someone from security or enterprise governance could point them to the policies, and the teams will discover that there are actually policies that we're supposed to be working with. Now, part of this is to help everyone frame when we say there is a strategy and is there a policy. The dev team might say not as far as we know, which would then point to communication issues. However, the process of doing the assessment itself is very important, and the key thing about it is that we're asking stakeholders to assess themselves. In order to do that, we need to have a direct engagement with them. There needs to be some level of trust. And unfortunately, and I know this is not an option for many of such assessments, doing everything over Zoom and Teams is not really ideal. What you really want is get everyone in the same room, bring in some treats so that everyone is comfortable and start creating that trust level. Remember, you're really asking people in some ways to bare their souls. So once again, there has to be a certain level of comfort and trust so that coming into assessment, people in that group need to be assured that this is not a threatening process. You know your job or bonus is on the line. That would not be a nice situation to work with. It's all about understanding, and I cannot stress this enough, the assessment is about understanding where we are in super objective terms. That's what SAM model provides you, in order to understand where we should be going next, how we should be improving. And again, building all that trust works much better if you're in the same room. Now, more tips on this process can be found on our website. To give an example, a very small tip, when you're asking the questions, avoid formulating them as, are you guys doing this? Because it sounds like if you're not doing it, oh my God. Rather than formulate them in terms of what does your activity X look like? So what are you doing for building? How do you build software systems? Rather than, are you using a completely automated, including full security analysis and tooling in your pipeline builds? It's a subtle difference, but the first one, like I said, is more confrontational way of asking the question, while the second one is much more soft and just asked like from a curiosity perspective. Even if the activity is not practiced, the answer could be that it's a more ad hoc approach without any documentation. A follow-up question in this context would be whether there is a need for a more structured process and how would they envision that? Because they might not need a certain activity, they might not need doing that. Now, of course, there are a lot of complicating factors. As you're working across an organization, you are going to have different development teams, different cultural norms within the team. The fact that your dev teams work in different regions of the world, and that actually also complicates the factor I've mentioned, if it's possible, get them in the same room. And you might also have teams with completely different tech stacks. The fact that we want to talk about maturity means that we'll need to remove ourselves from those details and talk about the general. Having gone through all of that, you need to establish the scope of the assessment. You could do that at the level of the enterprise, division, business unit, or even per product owner. This is entirely up to you, but the recommendation would be to start small. Now, typically you would either set the scope based on the organization structure. For instance, like I said, the full organization, or at the level of the business unit or dev group and so on. You could also do this based on your application risk profile. For instance, you're going to pick only applications that are internet facing with high risk and not pick applications that are only available on the internal network. Once you've defined administratively what your scope is, in the next step, you should go and define what things are within the scope. How many applications are within it, how many teams are involved, how many stacks and technology domains. Then we also need to consider what are the data that we are going to be stewards for. Which of the applications in scope are systems of record and what sort of records they contain. That is all about creating and establishing the scope for the assessment. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about the methodology behind using the model.